Greetings and salutations. Thank you for lending an ear to the voice of the times this Thursday, March 31, 2022. For today's editorial, determining costs of climate action requires a holistic approach. One of the most stubborn arguments offered against taking certain actions to mitigate climate change, or sometimes against taking any action at all, is that climate mitigation is too costly. Reducing harmful emissions substantially enough to keep global warming below a target of 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, for example, will cost tens of trillions of dollars, and at least for a period of several years or even a couple of decades, cost at least a few percent in global gross domestic product or GDP. What makes this argument so persistent and difficult to challenge is that some aspects of it are objectively true. Yes, it will cost a great deal of money to convert a world reliant on fossil fuel to technologies for transportation, energy production, industrial processes, and even consumer goods that have significantly less impact on the environment. And yes, given the drastic shifts in lifestyles, labor utilization, and travel patterns that conversion will require, economic productivity will inevitably suffer in some areas, and in many scenarios enough to cause a general decline in growth. The reason this has persisted is because until recently, there have not been economic models that capture the other side of what in reality is an equation with costs of climate action on one side and the avoided costs of climate impact on the other. In a baseline scenario, one in which no action was taken, it is relatively easy to forecast economic growth as long as one overlooks the potential impact of climate change, displaced people, effects on agricultural production, public health effects such as increases in respiratory diseases, and so on. Likewise, it is easy to estimate with a fair degree of accuracy the costs of different climate actions. Thus, the effect on economic growth becomes a simple matter of subtracting the amount of money diverted to climate action from GDP. The reason the costs of climate change impacts are overlooked is that they have been notoriously difficult to quantify. We know that these costs exist in the sense that we know some people will be displaced, some areas will not be able to produce food, or some people's health and lifespan will be negatively affected. But we do not know the costs well enough to express them in numerical terms. Without that, the argument that the costs of not taking climate action are ultimately greater than the costs of those actions cannot be reliably made. However, just as our knowledge of the characteristics of human-caused climate change has evolved and expanded over time, so has our knowledge of its specific effects on people and the planet. Numerous research studies over the past 2 years have used that knowledge to develop increasingly accurate models of the true costs of climate change, to the extent that they properly complete the economic equation and can no longer be disregarded. All of this means two things for a country such as the Philippines. First, it allows the argument that climate actions are too expensive for the overall economy, such as, for example, retiring coal-generating plants in favor of lower emission or renewable alternatives, or removing inefficient polluting jeepneys from the roads, to be objectively refuted. Second, detailed knowledge of climate impacts and costs allows policymakers to choose more cost-effective and efficient climate mitigation and adaptation actions, whether those are direct actions such as those mentioned above, or social actions aimed at helping affected people cope with a changing environment. Dealing with climate change is everyone's business, because everyone is and will continue to be affected by it, even those who would still like to believe it does not exist, or is not as serious as the prevailing mood of the rest of the world makes it out to be. In order to deal with it effectively, which ideally means dealing with it at the least necessary cost and disruption, a holistic approach needs to be applied, considering not only the costs of doing something, but the costs of doing nothing, or doing the wrong things. And that's the editorial for Thursday, March 31, 2022. For more news and information, get a copy of the Manila Times on print, subscribe to our digital edition, or log on to www.manilatimes.net. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and listen to The Voice of the Times.